moment, from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to the voices shaping our nation's future, from famous speeches,
"Give me liberty or give me death,"
to battle reenactments and visits to key historic sites across the country. We bring you unprecedented, all-platform coverage, exploring the stories, sights, and spirit that make up America. Join us for remarkable coast-to-coast coverage, featuring key events from our past that make possible the unlimited opportunities of our future, celebrating our nation's journey like no other network can. America 250, over a year of historic moments. C-SPAN, official media partner of America 250.
C-SPAN is brought to you by the cable, satellite, and streaming companies that provide C-SPAN as a public service.
Tonight on C-SPAN, Campaign 2026 coverage continues. Our ongoing look at this year's races for the U.S. House and Senate that could tip the balance of power in November. Live Campaign 2026 coverage on C-SPAN starts now.
Good evening from the nation's capital. We are 146 days out from the midterm elections, and the road to the Capitol for candidates in Maine, South Carolina, North Dakota, and Nevada begins tonight. We are bringing you results, reporter analysis, and candidate speeches. In South Carolina, the Palmetto State results are coming in after polls closed at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And in Maine and most of North Dakota, polls just closing at the top of the hour. We are just moments away from that. And later tonight in the deserts of Nevada, polls will close at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We want to welcome back to the table Jacob Rubashkin, who is deputy editor at Inside Elections. He's joined tonight by Abby Turner, who is National Journal's The Hotline Senate and Governor's correspondent. Thank you both for being here. Let's dig into new results from key South Carolina races. We'll begin with Lindsey Graham and his race to win a fifth term in the U.S. Senate. With 12% of the vote in this Republican primary, Senator Lindsey Graham leads by over 22,000 votes. Jacob Rubashkin, not a surprise here, or are you surprised by this margin?
No, I mean, I think this makes sense for what we were expecting. As we talked about a little earlier on the program, Lindsey Graham was polling just about that 50%. You allocate some undecideds. If he ends up at 60, I think that would be in line with expectations. That's a scare for him. It's never good for an incumbent senator to be losing 40% of the vote in their primary, but not something that he can't recover from. You know, we don't have a ton of vote in right now, and the more important number is, of course, where he is in the total vote count, not so much what separates him from Mark Lynch, but does he clear that 60% 50% margin, excuse me. If he's able to do that and do that with some room to spare as he is right now, that should make him feel a little bit more confident heading into the fall.
Sticking with this race, Abby Turner, what do you make? 14% of the vote in. It is still very early. What are you watching for here?
I think it's a little bit of a warning sign for Graham and Trump. I think this race was really a test of who kind of owns the America First agenda, the American First base. That was what Lynch was running on to the right of Graham. I think this was really going to be a moment for Graham to see, am I still aligned with the voters that were aligned with Trump, or are they shifting more towards the right and want to see a new face? For now, it seems like he's held on to a critical mass of them, but as Jacob said, 60% is kind of, a warning sign for him.
Lindsey Graham, first elected in 2003, seeking a fifth term to the U.S. Senate. Let's move on to the governor's race. On the Republican side, the primary tonight, it's a competitive race, Abby Turner. Let's look at some early results that we're getting there. These are the first three candidates that we want to show you. The fourth and fifth candidates are two members of Congress that our viewers will know, Nancy Mason, Ralph Norman. They're not in the top three right now. With 14% of the vote in, Pamela Abbott, who secured the endorsement of President Trump early on, is leading the pack by less than 4 percentage points.
Mm-hmm. I don't think this is a surprise in this race. It's a huge field here. And even after Trump's endorsement, there were some polls that were conducted, and Abbott just wasn't able to really shake it up the way that you would see some Trump-endorsed candidates do. I don't think it's surprising as well that Alan Wilson is trailing her right now in second, obviously by 4 percentage points. But as I said, earlier on in this program, he's been Attorney General since 2011. His name has been on so many ballots. I think it's just sheer name ID there with him.
And what do you make of this, Jacob Rubashkin? I mean, Ralph Norman, 17%, Nancy Mace, about 11%.
Look, I think that the reality that a lot of these candidates are facing when they try and make this jump from Congress to higher office is that, I don't know if you've heard, but Congress is really unpopular. The latest Gallup survey, which was from April 22nd of this year, Congress's approval rating 10%, Congress's disapproval rating 86%. I think the San Antonio Spurs have a higher approval rating in New York City right now than Congress does in the United States of America. And that's saying something. So I am not at all surprised that trying to run for higher office on your record as a member of Congress is falling flat for Nancy Mace, for Ralph Norman, for Randy Feenstra just a couple days ago. We'll see if Barry Moore can get over the hump in Alabama in that Senate race. But clearly, voters aren't happy with what they're seeing from Congress. Why would they decide to elevate somebody who's been in Congress to an office of even greater responsibility?
Jacob, we have our first check mark of the night. The Associated Press has called the race for Representative James Clyburn 15% of the vote in, and he's got 93% of it. We're not surprised here, but let's just talk. Let's talk about this seat, though, with redistricting battles that kicked off across the country, began in Texas by the urging of President Trump, and ricocheted around to many states. South Carolina opposed redistricting twice, and it was led by Republicans. Yeah,
look, this was one of the more interesting incidents in this redistricting war that Republicans have, on the whole, been winning across the country. South Carolina Republicans attempted to redraw the map to dismantle Jim Clyburn's district. This is the last majority black district in the state. It's the last Democratic-leaning district in the state. Other states across the South, Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, done it. They have taken at least one of their majority black districts and destroyed it essentially and turned it into a majority white Republican district. We've seen that happen in several other states, but in South Carolina they opted not to. And as you said, it was because the Republican state Senate leader and enough members of his conference didn't want to go ahead and take that extra step. I think it's interesting and there are a lot of reasons why they didn't do it. I think the most notable reason is probably because the South Carolina Senate does not elect its members this year. And so unlike in Indiana, where we sat here a couple months ago and watched one by one as those Indiana state senators who blocked redistricting in the Hoosier state fell to Trump-endorsed challengers, that is not a worry that South Carolina state senators have to deal with right now. And so I think the combination of the lower political threat and a fear that, if we kick out essentially Jim Clyburn, who is one of the most respected, powerful members of the Democratic Party, not just in the House of Representatives, but overall, right? This guy got Joe Biden elected president back in 2020. He's a very powerful figure, and I think a useful ally for the state when Democrats are in control. I think that was a risky proposition for the South Carolina Republicans, and they ultimately made the calculation better to keep the district, at least for now, while he's still running. And I wouldn't be surprised if they try again in 2 years, potentially when Jim Clyburn retires. He's getting up there in age, and we go through this whole rigmarole one more time.
All right. You can find all of the results for these key races that we're discussing tonight on our website. If you go to cspan.org/campaign2026, there's an interactive map that you can play with. There it is on your screen. Touch on the state that you're interested in, whether it's Maine, South Carolina, Nevada, North Dakota tonight, and you'll be able to follow along with each individual race. Watch as the percentage of vote comes in and as the percentages changes for the candidates. We want you to join in the conversation as well this evening. We want to take your pulse on Campaign 2026. with primaries in Maine, North Dakota, Nevada, and South Carolina tonight. Democrats dial in at 202-748-8920. Republicans 202-748-8921. Independents 202-748-8922. And if you voted today in one of those 4 states, call in at 202-748-8923. Or if you voted early in those states, you can call in on that line as well. Jacob Rubashkin is here with us, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, and Abby Turner along with us in this conversation tonight. She works for National Journal's Hotline, and she's the Senate and Governor's correspondent. Let's go back to the South Carolina governor's race and show again 17% of the vote in. This is a competitive primary tonight. Why are we going to watch this race closely throughout the next hour, Abby Turner?
This is another race that is a test of President Trump's endorsement. There's been one race so far this cycle where he has not gotten his chosen candidate through. That was last week in Iowa with Representative Randy Feenstra. He really needs this win politically tonight to get Evett at least to the runoff. This has never looked like it will avoid runoff, but he really needs this to be successful for him here. So Evett looks like she's probably going to clinch that top spot. The big question is who will be in that second place. Right now it looks like we have Attorney General Alan Wilson leading. Ram Reddy is in third. He's an interesting one who kind of came up in the last few weeks thanks to around $6 million in ad spending on the air there.
How does the runoff work in South Carolina?
Yeah, so it's in 2 weeks, which is a pretty short time frame. And we just saw the runoffs in Texas. That was a much longer window. There was not a lot of wiggle room here for candidates. So that could be a place where President Trump's endorsement really helps when voters don't have a lot of time to really see what are different about these two candidates. It really might just come down to Trump's endorsement in those final 2 weeks.
Will we see President Trump campaign for Pam Evett? What do you think, Jacob Rubashkin? We haven't seen him out on the trail.
Yeah, the president is more sparing with the actual in-person campaign trail appearances than he certainly is with endorsements themselves. He issues a lot of those on Truth Social. It is a rarer thing to see him actually head out from D.C. and hold a rally for someone. I think that if it looks like Pam Evett is going to lose the runoff, that may be the kind of thing that inspires the president to go down to South Carolina and hold a campaign rally. But at the moment, I think the expectation is probably that he does not do something in person for her.
Let's go to Melinda, who's calling from South Carolina, an independent. Melinda, good evening to you. What do you make of the contest? What do you make of the contest in the Palmetto State?
Well, it's just interesting. I am an independent. I'm also a poll clerk, and I am just struck every time by how few people turn out for primaries. And it's a pretty big primary, I'd say, for both parties in this state. But still interesting that we had, I think, a fairly low turnout overall.
And did you work the polls today?
I did.
Okay. And tell us, what did you see? What was it like?
The people that came in were definitely very enthusiastic. I think I'm in a precinct that definitely leans more Republican. Usually turns that way, but a lot of people complaining that people like to complain, but they don't like to show up to vote.
And Melinda, how do you plan to vote?
Well, I voted early this time so I could work the poll in a precinct that's not mine. But I was pretty excited to see so many candidates on both primary ballots. It's kind of unusual, especially for us to have a pretty loaded Democratic ballot as well. So that's good to see. We have choice.
And you're an independent. Did you flip back and forth between the parties, or did you stick to one party?
So, yeah, unfortunately, you can't. You have to pick one ticket. So I voted Democratic this time because there were some really great choices that I wanted, people I wanted to see advance on that side, and also just to encourage those candidates to keep running.
Okay, so close primary in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Melinda, so then in the general election, what do you think you'll do in that governor's race?
It's gonna depend who surfaces in the primaries. I mean, I am a massive Jermaine Johnson fan. He's just an incredible human. So I'm really hoping to get to vote for him in November.
Okay, Abby Turner.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Jermaine Johnson is a state lawmaker. People really do like him in this state. One thing that was really interesting with this primary is you have businessman Billy Webster jumped into this race, kind of late. And Johnson was alleging that the state Democratic Party wanted him to step aside for Webster to run. So this primary has not been as watched as the GOP primary here for governor. But it's definitely interesting, some of these dynamics there. You have a third candidate, Mullins McLeod. He was someone that was early into this primary. The state Democratic Party chair actually publicly asked him to step aside because there was a video of him after he got arrested with profanity-ridden rant.
So we're looking at the Democratic primary for the South Carolina gubernatorial race. 34% of the vote in. Jermaine Johnson in the lead right now. Leads by around 38,000 votes. Billy Webster trailing him around 58 to 32%, again with only 34% of the vote in. We'll continue to watch that. John in Walterboro, South Carolina, an independent. John, did you vote, and in which primary did you choose? Which party?
Well, yes, ma'am, I did vote today, and I chose for Republicans.
Okay, and who did you vote for?
Well, I did vote for Nancy Mace.
And why?
Well, I mean, honestly, when I got down there to the polling station, I was really constipated.
All right, we're going to move on to Randall in Maine, an independent. Randall in Maine, go ahead, tell us, did you vote today?
No, I did not.
And why not?
I was turned away from the polls because I'm an independent voter.
Oh, okay. And who would you have voted for?
Owen McCarthy.
But say that again?
Owen McCarthy.
Okay. And do you have a candidate in the Senate race?
I hadn't really paid that close attention. But the thing that bothers me the most is this is the way we make change. And this primary, I should be able to vote for so that we can make change, and it's gone. My ability to put my vote in was taken away from me.
Okay. Randall there in Maine isn't paying attention to that Senate race. That's surprising to me because there are a lot of people in Maine and outside of Maine that are paying attention to that Senate race, especially with Graham Plattner as the presumptive nominee.
Yeah. Well, he did mention he was going to vote for Owen McCarthy, who's running in the Republican primary. So I think, maybe not so uncommon that, Republicans haven't fully tuned in to what's going on in that Democratic primary at the moment.
Yeah.
I think that's part of a larger story about how this Senate race is going to progress from tonight onwards is Graham Plattner has won the first battle, but he hasn't won the war yet. He's got to win over a lot of voters who weren't sitting there thinking, I'm going to vote for Plattner, am I going to vote for Mills, I'm going to stay home. There's a whole other set of Maine voters out there, many of whom are not Republicans or Democrats, who are going to have to wake up tomorrow morning and start thinking at least more seriously about who they're going to cast a ballot for in the fall. And it's those voters, it's not the Democratic primary voters, it is those voters in the middle who are going to determine the outcome of the election in November.
Let's talk more about the Senate Democratic primary there with Graham Plattner, Janet Mills, who suspended her campaign. She's still on the ballot tonight. So people are going to pay attention closely to the margins here, Abby Turner. Why?
I think they want to see how much of a protest vote there is against Plattner. So looking at 2022, Sarah Gideon won with about 71% of the vote. Her opponents were still in the race, as of Mills has kind of dropped out of that race. She's still reminding people she's on the ballot. But in Sarah Gideon's race, she had about 70% there with two long shot candidates. I think if Plattner is below 70% against Mills, who has dropped her bid, I think that's a bit of a warning sign there that there is protest vote and that he might lose some of those people in a general election.
We're still waiting on results to come in the state of Maine. What do we know about how votes are calculated there? And will we know tonight the results of all these races?
So Maine kicks in ranked choice voting if no candidate gets 50% outright. I do think we'll know the Democratic nominee for Senate. It does look like it's going to be Plattner. And I do expect him to get above that 50% in the Senate race. The gubernatorial race, we might not know for a long time, just like in California. But that'll be one where you're going to have to see who are putting their, second, third choices. That's one where that three-way cross endorsement in that Democratic primary is really going to play out.
Yeah, let's talk about the governor's race. Likely Democrat seat. 5 Democratic candidates in the primary tonight. Let's talk about who these folks are and that little strategy that some of them have come up with to endorse.
Yeah, so you have a three-way endorsement between Hannah Pingree, Troy Jackson, and Shayna Bellows. They all kind of grew up in politics together in the early 2000s. They know each other. So in the last few weeks of this primary, they have appeared together. They have kind of tweeted at each other online as well. And this trio is backed by Graham Plattner. So they're telling, voters, if I'm not your number one, put me as, number 2 or number 3 if you're voting for one of these 3 people. So they're kind of in a bucket together. And then you have Nirav Shah, who is the former state CDC director, led the state during COVID, as Jacob mentioned earlier, has a really high name ID, but also trust with voters. That's something that we saw these COVID era officials really build with voters. And then last in this Democratic primary, you have Angus King III, son of Senator Angus King. He has kind of struggled to break through here.
And then on the GOP side, there's 7 candidates. Jacob Rubashkin, what are you looking for on the Republican primary?
I mean, can anybody exit tonight with the kind of vote total that can leave them feeling confident heading into ranked choice voting? With such a large field and with so many credible candidates, it's a similar story to the Democratic side, except there's, Bobby Charles is the front runner, but I'm not sure that he's a Nirav Shah level front runner right now. I think this race can get really twisty really quickly when we start factoring ranked choice. We're now 8 years into Mainers using ranked choice elections. They implemented the system in 2018, and they have been using it in races since then. However, it's a little bit more complex than just when you go in and you pick one candidate and that's your person. And so there's the opportunity for unpredictability, even if everyone kind of understands how they use the system, how to rank the candidates. It's hard enough to run a poll and get a sense of how a voter is going to vote on their first choice. Once you start asking them second choice, third choice, fourth choice, this is a primary that could be decided by whose fourth choices are going to whom. That's not something that any pollster is going to feel incredibly confident about ascertaining, and it means that all of us have to wait around for much longer, though we're used to it after California, to get any sort of clarity on who's going to emerge from the pack. And as we were talking about a little earlier, that's not even the end of the story either, because there is an independent, Rick Bennett, who's a former Republican member of the state legislature, who is well regarded in the state and is running a real campaign as a third-party candidate. Maine is a state that likes independents. They have one in the Senate right now, Angus King, a guy who in fact won 2 terms as an independent as governor back in the 1990s. They're a state that gave almost 30% of the vote to Ross Perot back in 1992. This is a state, one of the very few states where you have to take an independent candidate for governor seriously, because they are not only going to affect the race, they are legitimate threats to win.
Let's talk about the Maine congressional seats there, the House seats. In Maine first, you have incumbent Shelley Pingree, unopposed in a primary. This is rated solid Democrat. Talk about the first congressional district.
Now, this is the southern Maine district. This is Portland and the surrounding environs. This is the more Democratic part of the state. People, when they talk about Maine, they often talk about 2 Maines. They talk about the Portland metro area plus essentially everything 10 miles from the ocean as one Maine, and then everything else is the other Maine. That Maine is much more rural. It's Bangor, it's the county, Aroostook County, which is a massive municipality that borders Canada, and it's much more Republican. So when you look at, for instance, how Maine's electoral votes break down, because they divvy them up by congressional district, the first one, Democrats consistently win by double digits, upwards of 20%. Donald Trump has carried Maine's second district all 3 times he's been on the ballot, 2016, 2020, 2024. So a very kind of cleanly geographically divided state. The first district, not a competitive House race. The second district, one of Republicans' best pickup opportunities anywhere in the House, because Jared Golden, who has bedeviled Republicans ever since he got elected in 2018, not seeking re-election. Former Governor Paul LePage, who is a Republican, is going to be the nominee there. He's got a very good shot at flipping a seat. Republicans desperately need to be flipping seats if they want to hold off any sort of Democratic momentum when it comes to the midterms in the fall.
And this is likely R. It's been rated likely R, the second congressional district.
Yeah. Well, look, this is...
Is it because of the candidate?
No. It's not because of the candidate. It's because of the partisanship of the district. Before Jared Golden opted not to run for re-election, we actually had him rated as the favorite. A slight favorite, but a true one, even as a Democrat in this district, because Jared Golden was a really good candidate. But he was able to defy political gravity in a way that it's not obvious whether whichever Democrat emerges from tonight's primary, whether it's Baldacci, Jordan Wood, or Matt Dunlap, the state auditor, those people are untested. Meanwhile, you've got Paul LePage, somebody who has carried the second district every time he's been on the ballot running for governor. He's run for governor 3 times. He's won twice, but he's won the second district each of those 3 times. So simply by virtue of the partisanship of the district, he has to be the favorite. If anything, though, he probably makes Democrats a little bit more optimistic about holding on to this seat because he's a very controversial figure. He has a long track record of saying and doing all sorts of controversial and frankly offensive things. And he's incredibly polarizing. Mainers who like Paul LePage really like him. Mainers who don't like Paul LePage detest him in ways that persist even though he's been out of office for the past 8 years. And so he starts off with the advantage. He's also got a hard ceiling on that level of support. If Democrats can start to chip away, he doesn't have very much room to lose before that district becomes competitive again.
Maine polls closed at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We are still waiting for results. Let's circle back to that Senate race. As many of you know, 73-year-old Susan Collins, Republican, seeking her 6th term in the U.S. Senate. She's running unopposed in the primary tonight. She is likely to face Graham Plattner, the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side. Susan Collins, first elected in 1996, recently cast her 10,000th consecutive vote, the first senator to do so. She's also the first senator from Maine in 90 years to chair the Appropriations Committee. Abby Turner, how much is age playing into this race?
I think age is playing a lot into this race. It's playing a lot into a lot of races that we're looking at here. It's something that we saw in the Democratic primary with Janet Mills. It's something that Plattner had brought up. I think this is something that voters are thinking about more and more after Joe Biden's presidency. Obviously, she has the incumbency advantage. She has such a strong foothold in Maine, being able to carry that state when people like, Obama and Biden are winning there. So I think age will be a factor into it, but when you have age in the Senate, you also have tenure and respect.
The likely square-off is between Susan Collins and Graham Plattner. The ads have already started there in the state of Maine. Graham Plattner, 41 years old, oyster farmer and military vet. I want to show you what Maine voters have been seeing for this Senate race. Here are a couple of ads.
Susan Collins is fighting to keep Maine connected. As chair of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Collins just delivered over $13.6 million for upgrades at airports at Millinocket to Portland. Over the last 5 years, she secured $25.7 million for projects at Presque Isle, Freiburg, Machias, Brunswick, and beyond. Senator Susan Collins, investing in Maine's future.
This is the road where young Graham Plattner grew up in Sullivan, Maine. This is the uniform he wore after enlisting in the Marines to protect his country. This is the bay where he served as a harbor master and runs an oyster farm with his wife. This is where Graham lives now, on the very same road where he grew up, fighting for the people he knows, for the state he loves. It is and always will be Mainers first, Maine always.
I'm Graham Plattner, and I approve this message.
adds for Susan Collins and Graham Plattner in that marquee Senate race in the state of Maine. Jacob Rubashkin, are those ads effective?
We're going to find out. Give me 5 months and I'll have a really good answer for you. I think that those ads are a really good encapsulation of the kinds of messages the candidates are interested in getting across in this particular moment. We saw that Susan Collins ad. You mentioned chairwoman of appropriations in the Senate. That's an incredibly powerful position to hold. 10,000 votes consecutive. She's the Iron Woman of the United States Senate. This is central to her appeal. It's that voters may not like Donald Trump. They may not really like Republicans, but Susan Collins still delivers for them nonetheless. And she's got, over her career, she's got projects after projects in every single town in Maine that she can point to and say, I helped get the federal dollars for that to happen. And so even though you may not like everything that I do, I deliver for you. And that is a message that has kept her afloat even as the state has become more democratic. It's one that she's going to lean into very, very heavily over the next couple of months. Whether it's still enough is an open question. The partisanship in the state, as it is around the country, is greater than it ever has been in recent memory. And so voters may say, look, I like that you got me the money for that. I like that you funded this project, but ultimately, I want Democrats to be in control of the Senate, and so I can't vote for you anymore.
Our friends at Cook Political Report have rated this a toss-up, Abby Turner.
Mm-hmm. It definitely will be. I mean, it's going to be a close race. You know, we talk about how much Collins has delivered for the state, how much respect she has, what she's able to do in that position. But there comes a time, term after term, when you can't just keep writing that. I mean, we talk about this with like Greg Abbott in Texas. How many terms can you have under your belt until voters want to change? Will this be the change election? It might be. If the headwinds are in Democrats' favor, that could be the case. I think the one thing that complicates this here for them is just Graham Plattner's record.
Susan Collins, first elected 44 years old. She's now 73 and wants another 6 years in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. And look, I think she stands a good shot of winning one. We saw that ad from Plattner. It hits on two things, right? It is very much about his connection to Maine, right? When Democrats get in trouble in Maine, it's because they are perceived as being national figures. They're perceived as being from away, is what they say up there. That's what bedeviled Sarah Gideon in her race. She wasn't from Maine. She was from Rhode Island, and she didn't look the part. Plattner wants to remind people he very much is a Mainer. And also, it's an animated ad. It was narrated by a child. This is a guy who is trying to soften his image, right? There's plenty of gruffness to go around. We all know the backstory. We all know his troubled past. But as he begins to introduce himself to general election voters, he wants to portray a softer side of him.
It wasn't his voice.
It was not his, no, and it's a little bit jarring when you get to the end and you hear his voice versus the voice of the narrator. But look, I think that if he's going to win, he is going to have to disabuse voters of the notions they're going to get from Republicans, which is that he is a communist, violent, radical figure who's too dangerous to trust with Maine's Senate seat. And you better go with the trusted, known Susan Collins. He's got to both make the change case, but also convince voters that he is safe and that he is worthy and capable of doing the job.
Polls closed in the Palmetto State at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Connor's joining us from Columbia, South Carolina, on our line for Republicans. Good evening to you. Did you vote today?
Thank you for having me. Sadly, no, I did not.
Okay, and why not?
I did not have any time, and I did not have the proper documents as I am not registered.
Okay, so what do you make of the races in your state?
Well, it's pretty obvious. For the Senate, I think it's pretty obvious that Lindsey Graham is going to win because even though, as you said, with Iowa, Trump had his candidate lose. Unlike that race, Lindsey Graham has the advantage as the incumbent, and he also has the president's endorsement. So it's pretty obvious, and I don't think any of the other candidates have high-profile challenge to take on Graham.
Okay. Abby Turner?
I mean, I think that's true. When you look at the endorsement that Trump made in Iowa that didn't go as well, that was an open seat. a very contested primary. I think Graham was a foe of the president at one point, but he has gotten on his better side. And I think you're going to see that here tonight. Just glancing down at the results right now, there's 33% reporting right now. Graham has dipped under that 60% point we were talking about earlier, but still on track to win renomination.
Yeah, with 30-some% of the vote in, I believe it was. Let's move on to some other races there in South Carolina. Congressman Joe Wilson, the Associated Press has projected him the winner tonight in the Republican primary for the 2nd Congressional District. 27% of the vote in, 75% of the vote for Congressman Joe Wilson. He looks like he's cruising to victory. He has cruised to victory here tonight.
Yeah, I think for the Wilson family, the big question mark is the governor's race. It wasn't whether Father Wilson was going to get another term in Congress. I'm sure he's celebrating, but an expected result, I think the thing they're all looking for right now over at the Wilson household is can Alan Wilson get that 2nd spot in the Republican primary runoff?
Let's look at those numbers. 35% of the vote in, and Alan Wilson, the Attorney General, stepson of Representative Joe Wilson, in 2nd place right now. Abby Turner?
This was expected. I think it'll be interesting to see this go to a runoff if this is the matchup here between Evett and Wilson. Both have won statewide before. Evett obviously has Trump's backing, but one thing that Wilson has is he joined the lawsuit in 2020 to challenge the election results. It's something that he hasn't talked about a ton on the campaign trail, but it is something that he can lean into to talk about how he was an ally of the president. This race has always been who can be Trump's biggest ally here. That's not likely to go away in this 2-week runoff.
We're showing our viewers the top 3 vote getters right now. Missing from that list are 2 more candidates. Ram Reddy, who's trailing right now in 4th position at about 16% of the vote, just under Congressman Ralph Norman, who has 16.4%. And then Nancy Mace, the congresswoman from South Carolina, she is coming in 5th place right now with 11% of the vote.
Abby made a really good point earlier, which was look to the home bases of Ralph Norman and Nancy Mace, their congressional districts, the 1st for Nancy Mace, the 5th for Ralph Norman, to see whether they were getting the kind of big margins they needed in those areas to carry them into this runoff. We can just look at Charleston County, which makes up a big chunk of the 1st Congressional District. That's where Nancy Mace is from. 1st place in Charleston County, Alan Wilson. 2nd place in Charleston County, Pam Evett. 3rd place, Ram Reddy. 4th place, Nancy Mace, 13%. Getting 13% in your own congressional district, that is not going to cut it anywhere in the country, and it's not cutting it for Nancy Mace in the gubernatorial race. She has no home base to stand on. Clearly, it's not going to work out for her tonight.
Was she in trouble in running for re-election in her own district? Is that why? I mean, what is going on here in her district?
Look, it depends on the year, right? 2022, Nancy Mace was a top target for Donald Trump. He endorsed a challenger against her in that race because she had spoken out against him after January 6th. She had said that Trump had no future in the Republican Party. He made her a target. He endorsed an opponent to her, and she won a very narrow primary victory. 2024 comes around, and they're BFFs, and Trump endorses her, and she's the biggest Trump supporter. And she has another primary challenge that is actually backed this time by former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who Nancy Mace had voted to defenestrate back in the Speaker saga or earlier in that Congress. And she beat back that challenge too. So she always has trouble. It comes from different parts of the party. Sometimes it's pro-Trump trouble. Sometimes it's more establishment trouble. I don't think that she would have necessarily lost her primary this time around. I think that she thought she had a good shot of winning this gubernatorial race. She thought, look, I'm a national political figure. I'm on TV all the time. I know how to get headlines and attention in the halls of Congress, and I can raise money from a national audience. Why not give it a go? Ultimately, though, she never was able to get the Trump endorsement, and without that, she doesn't have the kind of statewide recognition and support that Alan Wilson does, or the money that Ram Reddy does. and that's why she's in fifth place right now.
Well, let's talk about her district, the first district in South Carolina to replace her. There's 11 Republican candidates, but it's a solid R. It's a solid Republican district.
Yeah, so this was a seat that was kind of on the margins of the battlefield back in 2018. Joe Cunningham, a Democrat, actually won this seat. This was represented even before then by Mark Sanford, if we want to go back to 2016. Cunningham wins it. Nancy Mace beats him in 2020, and in 2022, Republicans redrew it to make it a little bit less competitive. So she hasn't really had competitive general election races since then. Interestingly, in 2022, she ran against Annie Andrews, who is going to be the Democratic nominee for Senate tonight in South Carolina. But Trump won this district with 56% in the 2024 elections. If Democrats are having a fantastic night in November, we might be talking about this race. They like their candidate there, Nancy LaCour. She's a former three-star admiral who was ousted by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. She says it was because she was a woman, and she has gotten into that race. She raised a lot of money. It's not clear whether she's going to make it out of the primary without going to a runoff, at least at first. And on the Republican side, it looks like we're also headed for a runoff at this point. But Charleston County Councilwoman Jenny Costa Honeycutt is, I believe, still out in front. There are two other candidates there, Mark Smith, who's a state legislator, and then Sam McCown, who's a radiologist who's poured over $1 million of his own money into his campaign that could also end up in a primary runoff in 2 weeks.
We have an AP call for you. Annie Andrews wins the Democratic nomination in the U.S. Senate race in South Carolina, leading by 60,000 votes right now with 47% in. She gets a check mark by her name. Annie Andrews, who is she?
She had previously run, as Jacob mentioned, 1st District 2022. She's someone that has outraised Graham actually in several quarters so far. Graham is still the favorite here. I think something to watch tonight, though, is if Graham starts to lose some of the Republican base here and people that he needs just don't show up in November. This isn't a race that's on the map for Democrats yet, but in the year that we are in now, it could progress a little bit more.
Well, let's show our viewers what the latest is on that Graham primary contest with the percentage of the vote in at this point, just so we can compare here. 36% in, Senator Lindsey Graham in the lead, 59.4% to 26.8% for Mark Lynch. So, Abby Turner, when you say folks are going to be digging into counties to see where people turned out, and did they turn out for Lindsey Graham, which counties are you talking about?
I think you're going to look at these big suburban areas, whether that's where Columbia is, Charleston is, Greenville. This is where I think he's going to do very well. Where he's going to struggle is going to be with areas that may be more far right. This is where Mark Lynch is kind of trying to center himself, trying to claim that, America First agenda platform here. I mean, just looking at the map right now, Graham seems to be doing good in the low country area, but also, again, in those counties with cities in them.
And he's below 60% right now. If he gets below 50, Jacob Rubashkin, is that even a possibility?
Sure, it's a possibility. If it weren't a possibility, I think the folks at the AP would have put in the check for him now. I think you'd rather be him than Mark Lynch at the moment. If we look up in the northwest corner of the state by Greenville, where Mark Lynch is from, Graham is certainly doing worse there. He's only winning Greenville County by 3 points. It's actually quite striking geographically, the home base advantage that Mark Lynch enjoys there. But if you're Mark Lynch, you probably want it to be doing a little bit better there. You probably want it to be winning some of those areas rather than just holding the margins down a little bit. I think the rest of the vote would have to come in fairly negative for Graham to drop him below that 50% margin. If that happened, that would be a big deal because it's not like Lindsey Graham is John Cornyn or Bill Cassidy, the other two senators who have been defeated in their primaries in the Republican Party this cycle. He hasn't made an enemy out of Trump. He hasn't earned Trump's ire. This is just somebody who has always struggled with the base of his party, and that seems to continue on tonight.
Our viewers can play campaign analyst as well. If you go to cspan.org/campaign 2026, that is where you will see a county by county breakdown of results, and you can dig into the numbers as well. We want to go to results in Maine with less than 1% of the vote in the Democratic primary. It says 0% of the votes in, but it means less than 1%. Graham Plattner right now in the lead with just about 60%. Janet Mills, who suspended her campaign, she's still on the ballot. She's getting about 26% of the vote right now. It is still very, very early. Should we even talk about these numbers right now, Jacob Rubashkin? It's so early.
No.
Yeah. All right. I didn't think so either. But we are watching to see how much of the vote Janet Mills gets tonight, right, Abby Turner? Why?
Because people seem to be upset about this record that he has. You know, there was this incident where he had a tattoo that had, you know, ties to Nazism. There were controversial Reddit posts that he posted. There were a lot of things that have come out in the course of his campaign that have painted his character poorly. Now, he has talked about those are, you know, some of his darkest moments. They stem from PTSD when he did 3 tours in Iraq. He's saying, I am not that man anymore. But, you know, Mills ran ads about some of the things he has said. The Republicans are going to run stuff. I think what we're supposed to see here tonight is, are Democrats worried about electability? This primary is all about electability against Susan Collins. And some people may be saying, you know, I want to vote for Janet Mills, who suspended her campaign, versus Graham Plattner, who may come with some of this baggage.
And Democrats, this is a toss-up. So Democrats are eyeing this seat in the path to the majority.
Yeah. They need this. They need 4 seats plus to hold on to all of the other ones that they currently have. Maine was definitely in that top 4 list. I think there's been some concern about, can it stay there? I think some people have started to look to Iowa after last week. I think for now, we just have to get past this primary, and I think there'll be a better consensus of, can Plattner still pull this off?
Jacob Rubashkin, what are the other states, Maine, Iowa, for Democrats that they could potentially flip?
All right, number 1, North Carolina, top pickup opportunity on the map for Democrats. Former Governor Roy Cooper versus Michael Whatley, the Republican. This is lowest hanging fruit. It's also in a state they haven't won a Senate race in since 2008, so that tells you what the map looks like for Democrats. Number 2 state, probably Maine, despite all of the things that we've talked about, the difficulties with Graham Plattner. If you don't have Maine, you got to look further afield. Number 3, number 4, probably a tie here, Alaska and Ohio. We're already getting into deep red territory, states that went for Donald Trump by 10 points in the 2020 and 2024 presidential elections. But you've got Sherrod Brown, the former senator in Ohio, running a strong campaign for Democrats there against appointed Senator John Husted. You've got former Congresswoman Mary Peltola in Alaska, the only Democrat to win statewide in Alaska since, again, 2008, a year we're going to come back to a little bit over the next couple of months. She's running against Dan Sullivan, the Republican senator there. So those could be the 4, right? North Carolina, Maine, Alaska, Ohio. If Maine falls through, you've got to look even further afield. Now we're talking about Iowa, Josh Turek versus Ashley Hinson. Going to be competitive. Is it competitive enough to supplant Maine as the number 4 seat? TBD. After you get past Iowa, then we're talking Texas. Again, Democrats didn't win Texas in 2008, I'll tell you that. You got to go back a little bit further to find a time when they can do that. So it's hard for Democrats.
All right, let's go to South Carolina. Nancy Mace is addressing her supporters in her bid for governor.
Where people can murder, where they can sexually assault others, where predators walk amongst us, where they can leak evidence in a criminal case 2 days before an election to shame a survivor and the young woman she tried to help. So tonight, I want you to know that I'm going to endorse Alan Wilson for governor. I want a law and order governor, and that law and order governor is going to be Alan Wilson. And I not only think he's going to win tonight, I think he's going to mop the floor with Pamela Yvette. And I very much look forward to that. offer an opportunity to help his administration ensure that predators that got away in my case, that got away in other cases in South Carolina, that we finally put criminals behind bars. And I will do everything in my power to work with Alan and to work with his administration in my capacity as a private citizen and ensure that he wins election resoundingly. Thank you, God bless you, I love you, and God bless the great state of South Carolina.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace conceding her bid for governor there in South Carolina, and you heard her say, I am going to endorse Alan Wilson. Jacob Rubashkin.
I mean, I am surprised that that came as quickly as it did, because if you rewind back a couple months to when this race was first getting off the ground, Nancy Mace went on the floor of the House of Representatives. She accused Alan Wilson of protecting sexual assaulters, of protecting pedophiles. She accused him of dragging his feet on prosecuting violent criminals all across the state of South Carolina. She was incredibly pointed and public in her accusations against him. He returned all that in kind. He was very public in denouncing her for saying those things. So to see her stand up and endorse him when we're still counting the votes here is surprising to me, I think. Also another chapter, of course, in the ongoing book of Nancy Mace's relationship with Donald Trump, of course, endorsing against his chosen candidate, Pam Evitt.
Right. She was critical there of Pam Evitt and said that she would help Alan Wilson in any way that she could against Pam Evitt. Now, Nancy Mace in 5th place in this 5-way primary for the governor's nomination on the Republican side. She's trailing all the candidates. Pam Evitt, who was endorsed by President Trump, in the lead right now with 43% of the vote in. She has secured about 29% of that vote. Alan Wilson trailing behind by 3 percentage points. And then Congressman Ralph Norman in 3rd place with about 16.7% of that vote. And then Ron Reddy, he's just at the heels of Ralph Norman with about 15.6% of the vote. Abby Turner, I want to show a political headline about Nancy Mace. Nancy Mace knows her Epstein vote screwed her with Trump. She doesn't care.
She doesn't. I think that's something that she has actually campaigned on in this race, has been something that she has said, look, I came to Congress, I stood up to the Republican Party when it came to this issue. I didn't secure Trump's endorsement. Now, after Trump endorsed Pam Evitt, if you looked at Nancy Mace's Twitter, there was definitely some animosity there. She had put in her Twitter bio, endorsed by Trump in 2024 or something along the line. So she was still trying to play that card there. But I think this is something like we saw with Thomas Massie in Kentucky. You know, they do what they're going to do. This is their issue. This is what they want to do for their voters. And they're going to understand it's not going to put them in a good place with the president.
All right. We are watching tonight's primary contests in South Carolina, in Maine. There are also races taking place in North Dakota and Nevada. Those polls close later in the evening. If you are interested in those races, go to our website, cspan.org/campaign2026. Throughout the evening, we will bring you calls from the Associated Press. We use the AP for race calls, and you can play campaign analyst and dig into the numbers county by county for each of these races. The marquee race in Maine is, of course, the Democratic primary. Graham Plattner is the presumptive nominee for the Democrats. Janet Mills, who dropped her bid, well, she suspended it. She's still on the ballot, and she's got about 19.6% of this vote. That's less than 1% vote in, and Graham Plattner in the lead, which we expected. Do they count the votes very slowly in Maine?
Cannot be as slowly as California, I will say that. It gets slower with ranked choice voting, but I think we'll have a pretty good idea tonight about this race.
Okay, and what about the governor's race?
That one will take a while because this one right now, it does not look like anyone's going to clinch that 50% needed to avoid the ranked choice voting. That is one where they have to go through and count, who did this person rank on their second, their third. That one will take a while. Once whatever candidate hits 50%, that's where that ends.
Do you think is that the case for both the Democratic primary for governor as well as the Republican primary?
The Republican one, it could teeter, I think. So you have lawyer and attorney Bobby Charles here, worked in the Reagan White House. He has had more of a commanding lead in this Republican primary than Nirav Shah has in the Democratic primary. I still think, though, it could go to a ranked choice voting situation here. I think it's really going to depend on how much support that Jonathan Bush can coalesce.
Again, when it says 0% of the vote in, it means less than 1%. There's not literally 0 votes in. As you were just saying, Bobby Charles in the lead as expected here in the Republican primary for the Maine open Maine governor's seat. And then we're also, of course, watching the Democrats as well, because this is a likely Democratic pickup or likely Democrat seat in the general election. There are 5 Democratic candidates running there. Jacob Rubashkin?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's early on in tonight's totals. I wouldn't want to read anything into the votes that we have so far. But I think the race is going to look very, very close. Nirav Shah built up a big lead early on, but the last batch of polling that we got out of the state, it looked a lot tighter. We saw Shah, Jackson, Pingree, and Bellows essentially all kind of knotted up in that mid-20s. I think it's very possible, given the dynamics of this race, that we end up with 4 candidates all in that kind of 20 to 30% range. And because there's ranked choice voting and the voters of Maine understand that that's an option available to them, I think it's even more likely that all of these candidates ultimately end up bunched together in that first round, because you're free to vote for whomever you want to. You don't feel the need to vote strategically as you might in a different race. If you think your candidate doesn't have a great shot of winning, you can still cast your first choice vote for them and then cast your second choice vote for someone else. And so it has a kind of a homogenizing tendency here. And I would anticipate all these candidates, at least the top 4, Angus King is, I think, a different question, but the top 4 candidates should all finish probably within a few percent of each other in round 1.
So for Maine, if a candidate wins the plurality of 50% plus 1 in the first round, then they win. If no plurality, then it moves to more rounds. Lowest ranked candidates are eliminated each round. Top vote getter in final round wins. How many rounds do they go?
Until they get 50. I think that this Democratic one, you could see 2-3 rounds at least.
And when do those rounds take place?
It'll be interesting to see there. It'll be a while. I'm hoping it's not as long as California. I know we just got California called today for that one.
Yes, we should talk about that.
We should. But it'll be a while. I think, what might be interesting here with the Republican primary, as we saw in California, Donald Trump had kind of casted doubt on the amount of time it took to count votes. Maine obviously is a different scenario because they do use ranked choice voting. So I don't know if this is a scenario where Trump comes in and starts talking about, possible election fraud as he did in California. But I think that was an early glimpse of some of the things he might come out and say about some of these primaries when it comes to taking a while to count ballots.
Let's go to Columbia, South Carolina. Clint is watching there, an independent. Clint, election 2026. What are your thoughts?
Still tight.
Still tied?
Yeah, still tight. It's still very unsure how this is going to shake out. It's been this way for past couple months, and I don't think Pamela Abbott got the Trump bump that she was expecting. She may prevail. She may come out on top, but she's, from someone in South Carolina, she's been MIA for better half of 2 months. She's not attended debates. She's basically been waiting for this endorsement and being able to put those commercials on air here in South Carolina, and that's her own thing. If she does win, as somebody that leans as a conservative, watch South Carolina. She is a very vulnerable candidate.
Interesting, Clint. Thank you for that. Abby Turner.
I think that's interesting because this is something we saw in Iowa last week with Representative Randy Feenstra. He was really criticized for not showing up to debates, not going to forums. And if you read coverage of the debates that happened in this South Carolina primary, Pamela Evett not attending was something that was usually mentioned. I think I saw photos of a chicken dressed up kind of towards her at some of these debates where she wasn't there. So I think people do really care about seeing these people on the stage conversing with each other. In Iowa last week, I had talked to some GOP chairs about Rep. Randy Feenstra, and they had told me, if they can't talk about, their positions with fellow Republicans, how are you going to run against a Democrat? So I think I'm hearing some of that same sentiment in South Carolina when it comes to Evett not doing some of these debates as well.
And, to Clint's point, South Carolina, Republican state, no doubt about it. Democrat hasn't won statewide here in quite some time, but you don't have to go back too far to find some competitive gubernatorial races. Nikki Haley's first race back in 2010, that was a year that was really great for Republicans all across the map. Nikki Haley won by just a couple of points against Vincent Shaheen. It was about a 4-point race in South Carolina in 2010. She did a lot better in 2014 against the same opponent, but that initial race still challenging for her. Fast forward to 2018, Henry McMaster, the outgoing governor now, but the incumbent governor back then, faced Democrat James Smith. A great year for Democrats, won by about 7.5, 8 points. So a decent margin, but not. We're not talking about Idaho here. We're not talking about Wyoming. We're talking about a state where Democrats can get to 45, 46%. It's hard for them to get past that, but you combine the right sort of circumstances, and it's a race that Republicans are going to have to run through the tape on if the environment continues to get bad for them, and if Democrats can consolidate behind their candidate and make a real run for it.
Well, we do have another projection that was made this evening. CNN earlier projecting that Republican Steve Hilton will face Javier Becerra in November. We're just, a week late here, Jacob Rubashkin?
Who's counting?
Yeah. Well, so what do you make of the news?
Good news for Javier Becerra.
Because?
I think he's the winner of tonight because California is a really Democratic state, and he now gets to be the only Democrat in the general election. Steve Hilton is not going to be the governor of California. He's not going to win that race. He's not going to get particularly close in that race. Javier Becerra can breathe easy tonight because the alternative to Steve Hilton being his opponent was Tom Steyer, who has already dropped, I want to say, close to $300 million of his own money on his gubernatorial campaign, and that was just in the primary. So imagine what he was gearing up to spend in a general election against Javier Becerra.
This is after he ran for president and spent his own money on that contest.
He's up to about $500 million on failed campaigns so far. And frankly, I would say that Becerra is a winner of this all, but I think really the voters of California, the television watchers of California, are the true winners because they're not going to have to be subjected to another $300 million of Tom Steyer ads over the next 5 months.
Abby Turner, has this race become less interesting?
I don't think it becomes less interesting. I think, Javier Becerra is resting easy, know that he's facing Steve Hilton. I think the bigger task comes when he becomes governor and Gavin Newsom steps further into this presidential stage. He's going to have to decide if he's going to be someone that will defend Newsom's 2 terms as California governor. Anytime, one administration leaves and one enters, there are things that need fixed. Javier Becerra here has to decide if he's going to be an ally of Newsom, defend the way that California is, or if he's going to call out Newsom on some of the problems that he may inherit when he becomes governor.
All right, just to wrap up here about before we close for the evening, the Maine Senate Democratic primary votes are slowly coming in. For those political junkies that are going to keep watching results here on C-SPAN's website, cspan.org/campaign 2026, 1% of the vote is in right now. So Jacob Rubashkin, what county should they be looking at? What should they do tonight?
What should they do? They should go to sleep and they should wake up tomorrow morning and they should look at the results. I mean,
it's going to be that slow.
So Maine reports votes by towns. There are a lot of places only report votes by counties. Maine does it by town. They're very tiny. We're talking about places where you're casting under 100 votes apiece. There are a lot of moving pieces here that we're going to have to wait to aggregate up to the full picture. Look, I think less so than any sort of geographic lens to look at these results. The question is just going to be, can Graham Plattner issue a resounding win, a statement of confidence from the voters that he can use to kickstart the general election? Whether you want to set that line at 70% or 60%, anything lower than 60 certainly would be, I would say, a very weak showing for somebody who has essentially been running unopposed for the past month. But that's the real question here: is can Plattner put an exclamation point on a rough couple of weeks and set himself up for a strong general election?
And in the general election, he'll face off against incumbent Senator Susan Collins, 73 years old, seeking her 6th term in the U.S. Senate. She'd be the longest-serving senator from Maine if she wins. That race is rated a toss-up. Then there's also the open governor's race in Maine that we've been watching tonight. This is likely Democrat Abby Turner, 5 Democrats squaring off, 7 Republicans squaring off. What's the likelihood outcome of these primaries tonight?
I would say the Democratic one definitely headed for ranked choice voting there. The Republican one, I could see a scenario where lawyer Bobby Charles kind of pulls out, squeaks by barely with 50%. He faces some of his fiercest competition from Jonathan Bush there. I think we're going to see in the Democratic race, as we have talked about all night, 4 candidates kind of hovering around 20%. Angus King III is probably the first to be eliminated in that primary. So I would say Dems are definitely going to go through some ranked choice voting tabulations. Republicans may squeak by, but it's too early to tell. All right, and our viewers should also watch Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Incumbent Jared Golden, the Democrat, not seeking re-election, and the Cook Political Report has rated this now likely Republican as the former governor, Paula Page, is running for that seat. So you'll want to dig into those results. And then in South Carolina, we've been talking about Senator Lindsey Graham seeking his 5th term, first elected in 2003. You're going to want to watch the results in that race, as well as the governor's race there. It's a tight Republican primary. So those are some key races for you to dig into this evening. Oh, Lindsey Graham just won. There we go. Check mark by his name before we close out this evening with 50% in. There you go. Called by the Associated Press. Jacob Rubashkin, Abby Turner, thank you very much for the conversation this evening.
Thanks.
And it will continue on the Washington Journal tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. More primary results and more of your calls. Thanks for watching.
You're watching C-SPAN, Democracy Unfiltered. C-SPAN brings you Democracy Unfiltered in real time. Democracy doesn't take sides, neither does C-SPAN. In a world full of opinions, C-SPAN gives you direct access to the people and institutions that shape our nation. Unfiltered coverage of Congress as laws are debated and decided. Live proceedings from the United States Supreme Court, presidential speeches, briefings in historic moments as they happen. No commentary, no spin, no agenda. Just the democratic process presented in full without interruption, so you can watch the debates, hear every word, and make up your own mind.
C-SPAN's respected nonprofit service has offered Americans unfiltered gavel-to-gavel coverage of their government in action.
C-SPAN, bringing your democracy unfiltered. C-SPAN is brought to you by the cable, satellite, and streaming companies that provide C-SPAN as a public service.
On Wednesday, the CEO of Act Blue, the Maine online fundraising platform for Democrats, testifies on Capitol Hill about the organization's process for online donations, fundraising, and compliance with campaign finance laws. This comes amid allegations that fraudulent and possibly foreign contributions were made to U.S. elections as a result of weak donor verification measures by Act Blue. From the House Administration Committee, watch that hearing live at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, and online at cspan.org. Get ready to root for your favorite team at this year's annual Congressional Baseball Game. Watch live coverage Wednesday on C-SPAN as Democrats and Republicans step up to the plate and go head-to-head under the lights. A Washington tradition since 1909, members of Congress gather for an evening of friendly competition, hometown spirit, and bipartisan camaraderie, all while raising money for charity. Don't miss play-by-play coverage of the annual Congressional Baseball Game, live from Nationals Park, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN.
Coming up next, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman announcing the next crew of the Artemis 3 mission. NASA astronauts Andre Douglas, Frank Rubio, Randy Bresnik, and European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano. The goal of the mission is to test human lunar landing systems before sending astronauts to the moon on